JPA is the standard. Whenever people ask you what is JPA, you can tell them JPA is standard, and you are using Hibernate, which is one of the implementations of JPA. So before JPA, Hibernate was using session factory. Hibernate was using session factory to get session, and you save or update to save your object into the database or update the object in the database, or maybe using HQL. And for our JPA, we are using entity manager factory and using entity manager. Also use persist to save the object in the database, and use merge to update, create or update. Merge equals means create or update, and persist means create. So for our JPA entity manager, whenever you use create, you cannot provide ID to your student instance or your Podio entity class. There are 3 stages of your entity class. The first stage is transient. In the object status of Hibernate. First one is transient. When your new instance, new student, it doesn't contain anything. Hibernate not managing this instance, not control it, not using proxy, not using anything. So this is plain pure Java Podio instance. And it doesn't contain, it shouldn't contain ID, And after that, it has proxied, or we call it attached. It means our Hibernate gonna create proxy for it, start managing it. Maybe you save this instance to your database. You have saved it into your database, and also Hibernate start managing it, and you can use proxy on this object, on this instance. And after it, there's a stage we call it unproxied and detached. It means, unproxied and detached. So it means it's still using Hibernate proxy on this object, but it already detached it. If you want to reuse it, you should attach it back to the persistent context, the Hibernate cache layer. If you want to use lazy loading and the object is detached from your Hibernate, you will get lazy initialization exception. That's why you got a lazy initialization exception. Initialization exception. So we got 3 stages. And when you do persist function, when you create a new function, you have to provide new student without ID, and Hibernate is gonna save it into your database, and use maybe the sequence from your primary key to generate a new primary key. For your merge function, if you provide student without ID, it's gonna create a new student in your table. And if you provide student with ID, it's gonna try to update it first to see if any students inside. I'm gonna update that student. Okay, so that's how merge function work in Hibernate. And in JPA, we are going to use entity manager factory, persist merge. It's very easy to use. And also we use JPQL. We call it JPQL, JPA query language, very similar to our previous Hibernate query language. So whenever people ask you what is JPA, you just tell them it's standard. You use persist, merge, entity manager from Hibernate. It's a standard, and then Hibernate implemented JPA by using entity manager. And if you open the source code, if you check the entity manager, you're gonna see entity manager is a wrapper of the session. Internally, it's still using the session. So this is JPA. And there's another framework. Excuse me. There's another framework we call it Spring Data JPA. So Spring Data JPA is Spring Boot. It's Spring Boot, and it's a library from Spring Boot. It's really easy to use. I'm sure after we learn Spring Data JPA and after we learn Spring Boot, you're gonna use Spring Data JPA all day. Let me give you an example. So for repository, this is Spring Data JPA. We don't have any implementation. We only provide interface. Spring Data JPA gonna using reflection to read method name. And if you don't provide a query, it's gonna use method name. There's a pattern. Okay, if you are using same pattern, it can analyze your query based on the method name. And you don't need to provide implementations. You just use interface extend from JPA repository. Do you guys know how does it work? Why don't we create concrete implementation? We just use interface and we can get a lot of customized implementation behind this interface. Do you guys know how does it work? Which design pattern is Spring Data JPA using? So which design pattern is Spring Data JPA using? We only provide interface. Okay, proxy, that's correct. What proxy? Static proxy or dynamic proxy? Is it static proxy or dynamic proxy? Static proxy or dynamic proxy? And is that interface level proxy or class level proxy? No, no one knows. So this is dynamic proxy, and this is interface level proxy with Java implementation. And by default, it's gonna use proxy.new instance and with some invocation handler for it. And you can find simple JPA repository behind the real implementation. Behind your interface, it's gonna run this function, run this class. And this class is the It's more like generic class and gonna execute all your logic in this class. All right, let me show you the last part, the criteria query. Let's see, where is it? So criteria query, I mentioned yesterday, it was the dynamic query. You can use OD, like object-oriented design, to create your criteria query. And with criteria query, we can use builder, a kind of builder pattern. And you can give dynamic input. With different input, it's gonna generate different query. And we can combine them together. For example, if we have where clause, right? Where, and you have root select from which class, and you're gonna use join and join type. And also with different value, you can get different join. You can use fetch. If type value is not null, it's not empty, we can apply a different join. And for where, we can give different comparison, like it's null or equals. And we use all to combine them. And after that, we can generate our where clause. You can use where and use and, or maybe just the previous combination. After that, you can create your query. It's more like builder, just same as our builder pattern. So this is another implementation. If you have dynamic input, you have to use criteria query. You shouldn't create all those combinations. Like if you have 10 value to compare in your where clause, and you cannot write all those combinations, maybe 20 or 30 queries. You should create dynamic query with criteria builder. Okay, this is criteria query, and this is your Hibernate and Spring Data JPA. When you use Spring Data JPA, when you use Hibernate, okay, guys, when you use Hibernate, when you do your homework, you need to config those entity and table and mapping. If you don't use lombok, you have to provide getter and setter. Without lombok, you need to provide getter and setter. Also, in your class, you have to tell the Hibernate which package to scan and what dialect you need to use. So basically, you need POM XML and download the PostgreSQL or MySQL driver or the dialect. And you need to provide connection database, username, password, location, and the database name. And yeah, these are some examples you can check. Tomorrow we're gonna learn Spring LC and Spring LP. Spring LC and Spring LP. You need to give me your homework before tomorrow morning, homework deadline. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. or Wednesday, 10 a.m. CUP. And please check Spring, IOC, and AOP. I'm gonna cover some concept. And tomorrow's homework, if you finish today's homework, finish Hibernate homework already, and tomorrow's homework is Spring, AOP, and Spring IOC. And Spring Boot. Tomorrow also I need to introduce Spring Boot. So you need to combine your Hibernate with Spring Boot and provide Spring AOP aspect framework. Provide Spring AOP and before, after, run with system printout. Okay, that's our plan for tomorrow and tomorrow's homework. Today, let's stop here. And I'm gonna share this note to you guys. And for that project, I believe you can find it from the same GitHub. When you check the repository, there's another project. It's called Video Manager. You can find it from that GitHub. And you can pull it. For this project, ignore your utils. You need to ignore the tools. Ignore this tool, mapper tool. It has some bug. It's not like public library. I implemented mapper library based on reflection and dynamic proxy, but it has some bug. I didn't update it to like 2020. So if you have interest, you can have a look. So basically, this library is based on dynamic proxy and reflection, and it's gonna do some mapping from one instance to another instance with some customized annotation. All right, and for this project currently, what you need to know is the criteria query and some, on this one, you don't need to know, some criteria query and some concept of Spring Data JPA. And you can find customized query and query from those interfaces. Okay, and other things we're gonna cover tomorrow or maybe Thursday or Friday about the REST API, Spring MVC, REST API, and network knowledge. All right. Okay, guys, I'm gonna see you guys tomorrow morning at the same time. Okay, bye-bye. Don't forget your homework. Okay, gonna see you guys tomorrow morning. Bye-bye. Okay, bye, guys.